if all of you have been around, we all know our rights as consumers, and we had the Fair Credit Billing Act and Reg Z, and when we were all growing up, man, you didn't file a dispute unless you needed to. Now our consumers have gotten very, very smart. As we've seen more business go online, we start to see a lot of activity. And some of it's intentional fraud that we see that are taking place, and there's unintentional, that my daughter gets on her game or she gets on daddy's phone and she orders things and the bill comes in and I don't recognize it. But the side aspect of that is that it drives up cost for issuers that have to take the inbound inquiry. And by the way, this isn't even talking to you all on the front line in your banks that get the call, or the customer walks in and says, this was on my credit card statement, and then you get to your issuer processor. So there's costs upwards of $50 to be able to facilitate a chargeback. Issuers often write off low dollar values of chargebacks. Now you move to the acquiring side, there's millions of dollars. It's an ugly process. It's very time consuming. Merchants don't understand the rules in terms of what are my rights as to what I can do and I can't do. So ironically enough, Mastercard and Visa were on separate tracks to be able to bring their systems up to speed and bring them into the new age and put APIs in for our customers to be able to pick up their disputes and manage them. And so Visa was first, and then Mastercard followed. When we rewrote our claims manager, one of the things that the product team said was, I want to build a collaboration layer. I want to make it easier for issuers when they're raising a dispute to work directly with merchants to be able to resolve that and resolve it quickly. So collaboration for acquirers was born on the Mastercard side. The Visa equivalent of that is rapid dispute resolution management. And the idea is, it's not so much of we're trying to take chargebacks here and just move it up this way and do refunds earlier, but rather try to work up a paradigm to share more information at the time that the consumer initiates a call to their issuer in terms of recognizing the transaction. So I'll give you a couple of different layers with that. Collaboration itself, we launched just last Sunday. So what it does is literally when a consumer initiates a dispute with their issuer, it goes into Mastercard and we'll route that out to the acquirer. And the acquirer can make realistically two decisions. They can refund or request the funds to be moved back to the issuer immediately, or what they can do is just reject it and let it go through the chargeback process. What this does is this takes from several weeks of resolving the chargeback to between 24 and 72 hours. So that's the first step of what we're doing, and it's good for both sides of the ecosystem. Now I talked a little bit about friendly fraud. We acquired a company by the name of Ithaca, and Ithaca actually was what the collaboration platform was built on at Mastercard. Visa bought Verify, and they did a similar thing with rapid dispute resolution management. But one of the things that was a side benefit, Ithaca had started to build a digital receipt network. So what they found is, I get my bill, I go online to my issuer's mobile statement, I'm like, wait a minute, I don't recognize this charge. I can click on the charge and it'll bring back a clear merchant name, so that instead of the jumble that we often see on our statement, now you know the merchant's name and where it took place. I still don't recognize it, and hit it a second time, it'll pull back an HTML rendering of the receipt from the purchase. So I see the line item detail. So that gets to that point that you can now start to curb friendly fraud where I just don't seem to recognize transaction. So that was intriguing for us. And then the other piece that I really love is you can't put everything on a screen. So they have a product called Call Center, and that allows a merchant to share more compelling information around the purchase so that an agent can have an intelligent conversation with the consumer around, you order from this place all the time and your last order was this month. And Visa's doing similar things from that standpoint. And then the last piece I'll end on around disputes, because it's all being tied together. If you actually start to see it, is we're working on something known as first party fraud. Visa's already announced their compelling evidence, which is, instead of us waiting for chargebacks and sharing information back and forth over a long time, is that at the time that a dispute is initiated, then the parties share compelling information around the purchase. And so if the issuer accepts it on our side, if the issuer accepted authorization and there's compelling information about the purchases there, they own it and they lose dispute rights for certain chargeback types. Okay, things about the quality of the goods, duplicate processing, those I'll say, I'm talking about the fraud-related chargebacks. And then on the backside, if the merchant just simply shares this, it stops the chargeback. So the idea is to bring it up, provide a better consumer experience, help the merchants at least make it easier to share information on the transactions and balance the scales a little bit like that. So it's a lot to swallow, but it's important even setting in a bank that you recognize these are the things that both payment brands are doing.
And I think that from a merchant standpoint, which is a lot of the issue that we have, and I can think of one in particular for a partner in Michigan. They were going through a chargeback scenario that had dragged on for months. There was fraud involved.
Includes books.
Yeah, so the ability that Mastercard recognized that as an issue for at our level, right? And for the longest time, I've gone in and talking to merchants about, so I don't understand why the money comes out of my account right away. I don't understand, why it's here and why it's there. And fortunately, I tell them, say, well, look, on one side of the fence, the brands are worried about me, the cardholder, because that's where their revenue comes from in the grand scheme of things. I'm carrying a balance. Well, so they're take care of it. And in the past, it was the other way, right? We sided with the merchant. Well, then all of a sudden, the trigger. Well, now the money's not there. So in case of true fraud, we can't get it. But in that particular instance, this scenario for them would have saved them all that headache.
Yeah, Ron, it's interesting. So much of when I started to talk, it's all backloaded. And I spent a lot of time talking with acquirers and technology providers, one in particular, Count, who's owned by Equifax, about de-risking your portfolio and adding tools on the front end, right? We have so many merchants that are getting online, a lot of it as a result of COVID, and they're online, and when someone walks in your store and now you have a chip reader and you realize you don't have any liability on that, but all of a sudden you get online and the merchant's like, well, wait a minute, this person isn't who they say they are, and there's not that engagement to help them consult. And so we spend a lot of time about putting tools in at the time the consumer is initiating their account to do proper KYC to know who's actually building the account on my system. And then when the transaction's going in flight is to use the fraud tools and help the merchant understand this is what's good that gets it out of the back end where you're like, I don't understand this and I've got all this fraud. And I'll tell you, because I looked at it, it was crazy to take the restaurant and quick service restaurant category codes and look at disputes and what happened during COVID because of all the fraud that continues to rave these entrepreneurs of people coming in and one, just using bad cards, two, complaining about quality of food even though they ate the whole order and the likes of that. But it's been astronomical to see. But those are the types of environments where we need to deploy a whole end-to-end strategy. It's not about just waiting on the back end to solve that. Does that make sense? Questions around disputes? Make sense?
Time frame for us as cardholders to lodge that dispute. Is it still 180 days, give or take?
Yeah, I mean, there are some circumstances where you have advanced purchases such as furniture, where you have extended time frames with all that. You have extended time frames on travel, holidays, those types of things. But yeah, in general, it is. I don't know because I don't ever dispute anything. I just know what they tell me.
I've done it twice because I never got the product. Company wouldn't make it right. Lost both of them. I'm the only consumer in the industry to lose a chargeback and to do it twice.
Maybe you didn't write a good letter, man. I got to teach you letter 101. Listen, I will digress, man. My early days at Rocky Mountain Bank Card, as a merchant service rep, you had to call the merchants and explain why they had their chargebacks. Because those days we just mailed stuff out, man. I read some crazy letters. Sometime over a drink, I'll tell you the things that people disputed and got away with.
I thought, hey, I didn't get the product and I paid $50. I'm shooing. I got my money back. No, sorry. That's between you and the merchant. All right, close that card. It was a Visa.
Well, it's, actually, you know, it is funny. It's the conundrum on the issuing side, right? Which is, consumer tells you that they have a dispute. Like, probably in your gut, you're going, yeah, this looks like friendly fraud, but, firing a customer on the issuing side is a hell of a lot harder, and issuers have had a hard time. But now, with compelling evidence, you start to force that to go, look, you can write it off on your books, but your customer participated in this transaction, so therefore you're going to eat it. And eventually, they'll get to the point where they just decline transactions for that customer, knowing that they fit a model. And by the way, side note, and it's actually kind of interesting. Talked about digital receipts. What's cool is you're getting line item detail. What I theorize, and where I think we'll get eventually, is now I can take someone's dispute, now I can line it up to a product. Now you can start to look at where the time it was ordered, where the country. So in the future, you'll even have greater intelligence around what's in the cart and what is potential fraud.
I have a quick question. So is this something that a merchant will need to enroll in a program? Is it like a software? Or is it going to come on their regular statements, like from the data we pull from their cartridge?
Yeah, excellent thought. So I'll give you two different approaches, because Visa and Mastercard went about it differently. Visa's rapid dispute resolution management is a merchant-facing solution. So merchants can go into Verify, they can sign up for the services. The way that it works on rapid dispute resolution management, it's a little bit tougher for a small merchant. Probably ain't more at card not present, because card present, you don't have the liability with EMV cards now. But they can set up, I think it's 7 rules, and there's 10 different data elements they can put through, so you have to have an advanced degree to do it. And that's not a shot at them. It's actually smart. I'm trying to get our guys to do that, so they can enroll directly. There are some resellers that sign up merchants, but the fundamental problem, it wasn't an acquirer-facing product, right? Acquirers kind of are left in the back end to move the funds, because they move automatically. So once the merchant sets their criteria on Visa, then if it's, let's say they say below $50, I want to move the funds, then what Visa does is Visa debits the acquirer, which ultimately gets into the merchant's account, take that $50 out, and then the issuer gets credited for that. On the Mastercard side, with Mastercom, we literally are working with our acquirers, and they are the ones that their merchants are already enrolled. So if you're in my network and you get a dispute, we're setting up the queues today of those collaboration notifications. Now, the acquirers and their processors have to build the technology that allows a merchant to go into. So, for example, I do a lot of work with the guys over at First Data, now I guess Fiserv. They have a product known as Dispute Manager. Merchants go in and they resolve their chargebacks for that. Eventually, Fiserv will roll out collaboration, and they'll just go in and work their notification queue. So that's coming. That'll be a little bit more automated. And then we also have a secondary product where somebody has to write to an API to go to Ithaca Direct. And so it sets up above Mastercom and Rapid Dispute Resolution Management, because we get notifications from Visa issuers, Discover, American Express, and all Mastercard. So it sets a layer up and allows merchants to receive these notifications faster. That takes, if you're a smaller merchant, you're not going to write. You're going to participate through an acquirer that either writes it or a third party that writes it. If you're a larger merchant, somebody like a Walmart or Microsoft, they come direct to Ithaca. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
Do you foresee, so traditionally smaller community banks are going to get customers and merchants that come in, and they're going to want the dispute process handled from their bank, who then would work with someone like FiNet or go directly to Visa or Mastercard. Are you thinking that this program is going to have the merchant more likely going direct to Visa and Mastercard versus having the intermediary bank?
Yeah, good question. What the intent of this is to make it easier for them to solve disputes that they're going to let go anyway. And I'll quote on their behalf. Fiserv, 40% of their chargebacks, merchants let go the entire time frame and never respond. It just sits out there. When the time frame's up, the merchant loses the dispute and they go on. For those merchants, you're trying to go, look, if you're just going to give it up, just put the criteria that says, hey, at $50, just move the funds or do the refund. So that intent is to take more hands off, right? It's not to be able to do that. I do think over time, when we get into compelling evidence and first party fraud, it won't be so much the merchant, because remember, this is going to be more card not present, but it'll be the platforms, the gateways, the processors that will collect the data and they'll put it through it, but it'll be more automated. It won't be the types of things where a merchant goes and they have to write a letter, they have to do that. So those things over time will decrease the number of disputes where they walk in the door. I'm not gonna paint you a pretty blue sky to say, we're gonna get away from somebody who's sitting in front of their customer service rep and go, I get this charge back, how do we do it? I think those are still gonna sit out there because we're not gonna get rid of 100% of the friction that's out there. So those will still be there. And the intention of collaboration and compelling evidence and first party fraud is not to take the place of those situations where somebody has a right and wants to fight a chargeback. Can FiNet, their processors, arm you with more information? And I'm not making it about you guys, it's just a general comment that helps you have those conversations? Absolutely. Because they're tough conversations. The merchant doesn't understand it.
Jeff, do we think along those lines, is there going to be some type of fail-safe in there that if the threshold is $50 and I just move the funds, right? Because I'm, to your 40%. Much like back in the day when we had the book of bad cards and, you had a 3-week window to go out and commit fraud because nobody knew about this waiver. Is there some security feature in there that, okay, if I know all of a sudden now that I've done a couple of these and it's automatic because it's under a certain dollar threshold, is there a fail-safe in there to keep that, or is it,
no,
that's acceptable?
The consumer doesn't really, if it's on the consumer side, the consumer, if they're committing fraud, doesn't know that those criteria is set up. Okay, so it's more merchant-facing that says, hey, a $10 chargeback isn't worth it for me to go through all this process. I just refund it. I've already lost the goods. And so it's just easier for them to be able to do it. But yeah, the consumers, the first party fraud and the compelling evidence on the Visa side, that's much more aimed at using data to combat intentional fraud, misuse fraud, or unintentional fraud. That's more arming somebody to have a conversation with a customer. And I just say that the fraudsters aren't going to try to figure out where they can game systems. They absolutely can. But it's hard to refute things if you did it. And there's already fail-safes on the fraud side where if issuers don't report fraud cards and cancel the card and save, then they own the liability on those transactions. So they're incented to report them, and we use that data quite honestly to be able to route fraud out of our system.
Now, do you foresee when you, we have seen a ton of fraud at CSB in general, whether it is debit cards, ACH, check fraud, and we've seen much more people starting to have conversations about things like positive pay, ACH monitor, verification, payee names, all of those things. Do you foresee it getting to the point where merchants might start to, I could see our merchants saying I want to set a limit threshold, a ticket purchase is this, and if it kicks out, it wants to be reviewed, or it will not accept those kind of payments, to tender some of those fraudulent items that are coming through for $50,000, and there was no ticket value, and it was a cyber.
Yeah, I always encourage merchants, their providers, to look at, especially we have a new age of merchants coming in that aren't sophisticated to do it, is nobody wants to add friction in the process. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they're like, yeah, but it creates friction. I'm like, but at certain products, certain times of day, there's things that you have to invoke friction. If you go back to my earlier comment, as we start to see more sharing of line item detail, by the way, some merchants are scary about sharing their SKU level data because they think it's going to get in the issuer's hands and they're going to sell it to their competitors. It's not. But beyond that, as you get smarter, what you do want. You want the merchant to go, here's what my normal order looks like, right? And hopefully the fraud providers like account who can do this today, this is outside those parameters, call the person. Put it through a step-up process to be able to do it. And that will take time, especially with small merchants, and it's helping them ensure, like my number one thing if somebody came to me is, ask your provider what services they offer to be able to identify fraudulent transactions on the front end versus the back end. Very simple. If I'm plugging into a gateway and I'm not picking on them, let's just use, I'm going into a commerce platform, Shopify. My question is, Shopify, how do you help me? I've got my business on your platform. How do you help me understand what could be a potential fraudulent transaction? And if they don't, then the merchant knows going in, I might have risk. I may have to make my own decisions to do it. But step up a manual, I think always is important if it fits outside the norm. I'll never forget, man, I had a guy call me one time. He goes, I got a chargeback for $800 for an engine. He goes, the card ran through. I said, well, how did it run through? Well, the mom called me, he gave me the credit card, and the son came down and picked up the engine. I go, did you see the card? No, it got authorized. So you think about that, that was years ago. That same mindset, he should have told himself, this isn't right. So you do have to have some common sense, but yeah, technology should start to drive them more of that, is what it should do.
I just had a thought over here. You mentioned a little earlier, especially during the pandemic, where people were going to restaurants and just saying, hey, I had horrible service or I didn't like the quality. I did not know that. I never heard of that. But I know that there are some restaurants in Columbus that we have prospected, and they don't accept merchant services at all. And chargebacks is one of the reasons. So I thought they were just crazy, and now I know they
No, like, I'm still shocked sitting in Atlanta how much there is, the Grubhubs and all that are out there. And it's like you walk into a restaurant and how much gets picked up. I'm also shocked at how many people, like, I can't do it, man. I went to Chili's one night and I picked up an order. My house was 5 miles away. It was the nastiest meal I ever had. I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore, right? But people still do it. And then, like, the fraudsters get smart, right? They go, if there's not any checks and controls and I can get away with it, right? Because you're a card and you're a name. Doesn't mean that the two match, right? And so I come in, the order's good, the transaction's good, I dispute it. Well, the next time, they're not saving the card. You're not creating a negative list, and so they can get away with it over time. And so it's about deploying smarter technologies. And that's more on the card not present environment. Are there disputes that happen in a restaurant? Yeah, but not as much in the I sit down and I have a problem with my meal. That usually sorts itself out quite well. It's the card not present is where they're hitting all of these guys pretty hard.
Yeah, actually, we had merchants of ours early on in the pandemic when we were just figuring out, okay, I need to stay open as a business, so I'm going to do carry out or curbside or whatever. And there were large orders, parties like this, in nice sized restaurants that then got charged back because whatever reason, so it wasn't a chip enabled transaction because it was over the phone. We hadn't gotten to the point where, hey, let's give everybody a mobile device. So when they're coming out with the food, now you can insert that chip to make it a more secure transaction. You can do the physical security features that you normally do. Is this Ron or Rhonda's card? Or is it Jeff's card? Which I wouldn't mind having Jeff's card.
Why'd you trust me? Oh my God! I'll give you the bill that goes with it. Jeff spends a lot of money on this card.
But yeah, Jay, it was crazy the amount of money that we saw being charged back in that first 3 to 6 month time frame. So I can understand. I mean, usually the reason I walk into a restaurant or a salon or any cash-heavy business, the reason they don't want to do merchant services is they'll give you a reason. And as we're walking out the doors, I just don't want to count my cash. I don't want anybody to know what I'm making. So they're hiding the cash. That's usually the reason.
That's good. Yeah, I've seen that.
But, you know, the chargebacks and the other scenarios really do play a big part.
But you bring up a good point. If the order is outside the norm, then have a step up to validate who it is. And I'm amazed that, because we as an industry allowed it, if it's authorized, it's good, right? And so whether you take a mobile device, which is a great idea, right? Which is, no, just bring your card, I'll run your card when you get here. Guarantee you they'll walk away, right? You know, the petroleum industry was always pretty good, is they push you inside. And you notice, man, when they push you inside, nobody ever walked in, because the island was the best way to test cards. And now they're doing it through vending machines. So they'll test physical cards through vending machines because they don't have to face anybody. And there's usually not a step up there, but that's where consultation comes in to go, yeah, you can do this business, but just think about how you're doing things. Like, and I think they may be on your books. My wife has a furniture store, and they still take the second payment because they don't trust their drivers with a mobile terminal. And I'm like, they called me one time because they had a problem with a transaction that was going on. I go, you're gonna lose. Like, you're gonna lose. I go, just get a mobile device. You get the read. They've accepted the goods. Yes, if it's quality, it's a different thing, but it's a smarter play in today's world. It's cheap to add a dongle and just go out and do the payment right there. That'll curb your fraud right away, because they'll go to the next 5 guys that don't do it.
Well, and on legitimate transactions, it's cutting your rate.
Yeah.
You always want to get a retail rate when you can. I mean,
From that point, what would be your suggestion when we talk to customers? I mean, it is a hard conversation to say to them, like, make sure your card holder is present. Make sure you're verifying that person, because in the digital world we live in, no one wants to come in. They want to tap that card, they don't want to stick it in, they don't want to give you their ID. So I hear you saying that is still the most secure way for them to, one, manage a dispute if there is one, because you've got a signature from the customer, you've got, you verified ID. 2, like when you're doing that, to avoid fraud. So from your specific, what would you say to them? Because most customers are looking for, our customers are looking for the convenience for their customers.
Yeah, so the first answer is anytime that you can get an EMD read or a tap. Tap is just as effective as EMD, so both work well, and that is a nice convenience. I'll tell you a story in a minute about how many times the industry tried to do tap and go and it didn't work, but those are the most secure. When you get a phone order, right? Order on the phone, or there's places that, larger merchants that do order online, pick up in store. It's a great opportunity to get the card, bring your card. Delta does this. Certain transactions, Delta will require you to bring your card to the airport. And guess what? If you forget your card, you have to cancel that reservation and they'll redo it. I've watched it happen. Because it's to try to create that. And so you have to help them understand is there's convenience when the customer's in front of you. And there's another convenience when they ordered someplace else and it's just outside the norm. That's not about convenience. That's about making sure. Now, if it's somebody I've done business with for 100 years,
Sure.
and I've always taken that happens every day of the week, right? And that's a different story. But it's somebody that you don't know. Indications are, if you don't know them, would you validate who they are? Now, let's go back to, you mentioned ID, and you mentioned signatures. Nobody's an expert on IDs, and if you have a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid at the front, they're going to look at the ID, yeah, it looks good to me, and they don't want the friction, right? We've done away with signatures.
Okay.
Mastercard in the United States did away with signatures, I think it's been 3-4 years ago. The reason we did is we found that it didn't add any benefit by having the retail clerk check the signature. It didn't prevent any fraud. There was no evidence. So we've just done away with it. So you no longer have to sign on Mastercard.
any dollar amount?
I'd have to go back and look, because at one point I think there was, but I don't think that there's a requirement. I think we did away with it all the way across the board. But I'll confirm that for you, Ron, because you weren't getting anything, right? You're not a handwriting expert. And by the way, if I didn't sign my card, you grabbed my card, you signed it. Guess what? You're my signature. And so my personal opinion, signature does nothing and it's not required anymore. I don't know that it may make merchants comfortable if they see an ID, but I don't know that that's what you hang your hat on if you got a dispute on a card not present transaction to say, but I checked the ID. I'd rather see you have electronic tools on the card not present transaction to begin with that actually do that validation up front to be able to run it against fraud scores and look at that versus relying on something if they come in store. But yeah, the simple thing of, yeah, just make sure you bring your card. I'll tell you, they don't bring the card.